Hi darlings, today we're going to talk about pearls and beading. This one's going to be kind of a simple, basic sort of primer on how to render pearls and beading in the context of clothing. I have a more complex embellishment, compound beading sort of thing video in the queue for much later. If you are interested in rendering the kind of beading where it's just one kind of bead all stuck next to each other, just filling the fabric, then what you want to do is watch my sequins video, because I would render that kind of beading the exact same way I would render sequins. So I'm going to post a link somewhere, probably also in the info box. So go watch the sequins video. There's two videos because I go over 6 different ways to render sequins using a bunch of different media and showing off different levels of shine. Okay, so go watch those for that. This is not going to cover jewelry. I'm a fashion designer. I've not had a bunch of experience designing jewelry. I've had a little experience, but not a whole lot. But I can illustrate it. If you want a jewelry illustration video, that'll probably be a couple of videos actually. If you want that, drop me a comment. Just keep in mind that the current subscriber request queue is 13 months long. I did not stutter, 13 months long. And so keep that in mind when you make any requests at this point, that it's going to take that long. But, leave all the requests. As you know, my number one rule for illustrating anything for design communication is to look at your swatch, your material, whatever. You can have irregular pearls, you can have perfectly smooth pearls, you can have them in different colors. There's so many real and fake pearls in a million colors out there. Look at the pearl you have, or, find the pearl that you want to illustrate. I'm drawing on slightly bigger croquis today because I'm going to be drawing like little details and I want to make sure you guys see everything. With pearls, the number one thing is whether they're on a strand around your neck or stuck as beading onto a garment, is to capture its bulk. So I'm going to draw this. It's just kind of like slanted and leaning. And, pearls are knotted so that they're not stiff. They fall and hang. And so this is going to sit around my neck like this, loop over the shoulder, and it's going to hang. Cause gravity. If you're watching my drawing clothes series, you've heard me go on and on and on about gravity. So it's going to hang this way. She's leaning this way, but this is the direction of gravity. So that's going to be my pearl strand. And let's say that I want really big pearls. And I'm rendering really big pearls right now because I want you guys to be able to see it. Make sure they're the size that you want. Give them a tiny bit of space in between. Notice that they are sitting on the body, and so they're sticking up away from the body. If you were to do a cuff, you wouldn't put the pearl along the edge of the skin. No, you would see the bulk of the pearl extended past the woman's arm. Give it that 3D-ness. Small ones that are more regular size. It wraps around the arm. Now I'm going to demo with marker, but for pearls, the technique is going to be the same with paint as it is with marker. Just you have to wait for paint layers to dry before you move from step to step. I'm using today for the demo Prismacolor markers in almond milk and brick beige. When you look at pearls, you have a base color, you have a highlight, and then you have a shadow next to it. And so what I do with pearls is when I have teeny tiny itty bitty pearls like this, I don't shadow and highlight each one. Are you kidding me right now? Do I look like I have the time for that nonsense? No, the answer is no. If you're doing pearls of this scale, yes, you're gonna do highlights and shadows. These itty bitty little seed pearls and regular no. If you want to make yourself crazy, sure, be my guest. What I would do is I would take my pearl color and just color that in. And then what I like to do is to take my mechanical pencil and kind of introduce a bit of 3D-ness in the line quality. So instead of a perfect little circle, try to bring a little line quality and little flare so it doesn't look like tiny little circles. You know, I put in the heavy pencil where the shadows would be. If you watch my shiny fabrics video, then you know that I will either add a white highlight later, or I will leave white of the paper to create highlights. With pearls, you have so many little highlights going on. I find it easier just to add the highlight afterwards. So that's what I'm going to do here. When I add shadows, I add 3 different kinds of shadows. Number 1, I add shadows that are right next to the highlight at the high point of the pearl. Even when you have irregular shapes, you will see that. And then I shadow according to my 3 kinds of shadow on the pearl. So here, the light source is dead on and it's shadowed in here. My light source is here, and so I'm going to shadow along the dark side of each pearl. And then I'm going to drop a shadow behind the pearls on the skin or the clothing or whatever's going on back there. Here's my brick beige, and I'm going to I chose kind of a creamier color for my pearls. God. See, you can't even fit that. That's ridiculous. Ugh, don't do that. Here, these are going to be really dark because they're in the shadow. And then as they're facing the light, in between gaps. There are a lot of different ways you can approach highlight. Ta-da! So many things, okay? You can add a little white highlight. As you can see, it doesn't do anything, and this is a really strong white pencil, okay? Because if you try to put a white pencil on top of a really light color, it's not really going to do anything. Now, if you have a really beautiful, dark, smoky, gray pearls, then you can put a little white highlight there and it'll show up. You can use a marker. Again, not as strong, pretty subtle. Okay, you can do that on the dark. You can use a white gel pen. You want to put that highlight right next to the shadow. They should be touching. You can use some of this white deleter ink, and that'll give you your strongest highlights. Right? You see it finally starting to show up. I also like to use gouache. Gouache is the strongest white. White gouache is opaque and intense, and it'll really give you a nice highlight. And then again, I would go in with my pencil and bring that line quality into it so that your line is heaviest in the shadow. Don't squish any of these. Pearls don't squish. The body and fabrics have to squish around them. If you wanted to do this with color pencil, here's a 70% cool gray Prismacolor. What I like to do is leave the white of the paper. This is actually easier to do with color pencil. Let's say again, that's my light source. So I want to have a highlight here. And so I'm just gonna, anytime I do anything shiny, I always leave a bigger highlight than I think I might need, because I can always go in and fill in the white. I can't take it away. So I exercise that little bit of caution. And then I go in with my shadow color. I'm going to use a black right now. I'm going to add that shadow right under the highlight. With paints, I don't like to use metallics for pearls because it just seems so strong. I have all these markers, right? And it just looks too strong. They look like metal beads as opposed to pearls, right? But with color pencils, the effect is soft enough where it looks metallic and pearlescent and glowy without it looking like steel ball bearings or something. Add my shadows with my just a gray color, right? But then you end up with a very shimmery, pearly look, which I think is quite pretty. And again, you can do this kind of like leaving the white of the paper effect with markers or paint. I just think it's easier to do it this way with markers and paint and this way with the color pencils. And then the last thing you would do is to drop in your drop shadow on your garment or your fabric. So let's say she's naked, drop in my shadow under and behind the pearls. Now this shadow is quite big because the pearls themselves are big. Here, the pearls are tiny, so it won't leave that big of a shadow. And then again, much bigger shadows for these. Tiny shadows for here. That's it. That part is hanging, so leave that alone. And then here you'd have a little drop shadow under the cuff. So 3 different shadows right next to the highlight, on the pearl using your 3 kinds of shadow, and then a drop shadow under the pearls onto the garment, the body, whatever. Okay? The number one thing that students freak out about, in my experience, when it comes to rendering beading is, I have a dress covered in beads. Do I need to draw every single tiny little circle? No. The answer is no. Okay? Because remember, we scaled down to fit the croquis. You're not drawing life size. Look at this dress. I mean, it's too big to even be croquis size, right? And yet, even bigger than croquis size, you don't really see every single dot. You see the stripe pattern. So what you're going to do is you're going to end up drawing the stripe pattern instead. So I'm drawing section by section every time the beading striping changes direction. Now beaded fringe, this is just hanging straight down, but remember we follow gravity. There's your plumb line, and so even if it sits at an angle, it's going to follow gravity and not this. It's not sticking straight out. Okay, you know, same with something like this. You know, you just draw the space, watch your proportions. I'm going to color in kind of the creamy base of the dress and then put in my shadows. Again, I'm going to use my almond milk. The painting method is going to be the same. When you draw this out on watercolor paper, you guys know that I hate erasing on watercolor paper because I think it messes up the paper quality and texture and will affect how the paint looks on it. And so what I will do with something like this is draw a rough on tracing paper, figure out all my mistakes and whatnot, and then trace it onto my watercolor paper. So you need to figure out what medium is going to give you the result that matches your bead, rhinestone, pearl of choice. I can't spoon feed you and be like, this bead is this color pencil and this bead is this marker. Like, it's completely impossible. So you just have to practice being better at looking at your materials and finding the right medium. You know, this Prismacolor warm color pencil is probably the best color match. So I'm gonna go with that. And I'm gonna start putting in my stripes. You know, make sure you're following the contours of the body and the panels as you work. Silver beads, rhinestones. How precise you get at this point is really up to you. You can be an illustrator who is really meticulous about every single bead. You can be an illustrator that's really loose and free flow with the shapes, very loose interpretation. I work a little bit in between. Because here's the thing, is this illustration, if you're doing it for design communication, this illustration is to give kind of the mood and attitude of the dress with the beading pattern and how it all works. But you're not going to develop a beading pattern from this. You're going to go into like a vector-based program and you're going to have a grid. And you're going to create stamps of these beads and you're going to precisely put in, you know, each bead where it belongs and map it out in a perfect grid for your beader. Or you're going to have someone do that. So this is to give the look of the beading, but don't feel like you need to get in there with every single teeny tiny, oh my God. I mean, some people really love that kind of illustration work. Good on you. I can't do it. I don't have the patience for it. That's why I love these things. Some people, in lieu of something like this, I mean, this is kind of fat. This is extra skinny. Some people like to use whiteout pens. You know the kind that you shake, it looks like a pen and you shake it up and you hear the ball rattling around in there and you squeeze it and the whiteout comes out. Okay. Some people like to use those pens. I'll use it in a pinch. I've used it before, but it's the flow of the ink is so unreliable because those aren't created for painting. They're to just like dab on documents to correct things. So they're not my favorite, but they'll do in a pinch. Just throw in a couple of penciled in chains in here. Little rhinestones in there. Take my gouache and I'll put in the strongest highlights. So you see how at the peak apex where it's highlighted just overall, it'll be the shiniest. And then on the top of the shoulder, because that's my light source. Then a few, because this hip is swinging upwards, so I'm gonna put a few here, a few here. You look at this dress, you see in the silhouette that there are all these bumps because the beads are raised. Just like we did with the pearls. I mean, the pearls are really, the ones we drew were really round and big, and these are a lot flatter, but you're gonna see those silhouettes in the shape of the garment, and so you better put those on your garment as well. And then that part is flat. That part has like a sequin binding, so I'm gonna leave that. Actually put that in there. Little row of sequins up there. I'm gonna put in some little highlights in the sequin so that it looks textured. I mean, this is an overall like more purpley looking than this one. These look more like they're French gray tones, but you get the idea, right? And then you're gonna put in sparkle crosses, which are my favorite. Some people like sparkle X's. Some people like sparkle crosses. I like crosses. That's just me, whatever. But I like to add little touches of sparkle. Okay, you can do it using white media, like white gel pen or white gouache. You could do it using pencil, whatever you think is gonna work out and show up better. This one is such a white heavy thing that I'm going to use my pencil. I have no idea. I tend to like double crosses where I go like that. And I flick out. I never do this. That doesn't look right. You have to flick out so that you get the tapers. And then I always do them in different sizes. Ting, 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 ting. Ting, ting. Now, if you're doing this fringe, beaded fringe is heavy. It follows gravity. I'm going to touch on fringe in my moving drapes video, but, you know, it doesn't have to be static. It could swing a little and have a little fun. It's a little bit heavy. It's going to follow gravity, but you can get it to swing. I'm going to use this silver one so that it kind of reflects the beads. And it's longer and then it's shorter. If you want the really beaded looking effect, you can zigzag and curl. Beaded fringe has kind of a neat edge because it doesn't taper and flick, it just ends. And then I like to mix in a few done with graphite just to give it depth. Because if they're all the same color, they tend to kind of fall into each other. And in photography, they don't look like that because there's literally a light and shadow on each beaded fringe, but we don't have time for that. Maybe I'll add what's sticking out. What did we learn today? Let's review. Number 1. If you're doing all over beading where there's no discernible pattern, it's just filled with beads, whether they're seed beads or pave beads or bugle beads or rhinestones, then go watch the sequins videos. There's 2 of them. Number 2, always consider the bulk of your pearl or bead. These things are 3D elements. Look at the pearl or bead you want to render Okay, some of them are gonna lay closer to the body because they're flatter. Maybe they're flat on one side so that they're glued to your garment, or if they're totally round, then they're gonna stick up even higher. These pearls and beads are not gonna squish. You have to squish the body and fabric around them. You keep your bead and pearl shapes intact. You have your base color, you have your highlight, you have your shadow that sits behind your highlight, your shadow that sits on the dark side of the pearl, and the drop shadow that comes from the pearl onto your skin or clothes. You can add white highlights using a variety of white media that will give you the effect that you're looking for. If you have dark pearls, then soft whites like charcoal pencil, color pencil, gel pen, those things are going to stand out. But when you have really light color pearls, you're going to need a really strong highlight like gouache, like this deleter ink that I got in Japan, which I'm fairly certain they have American versions of this as well. I just haven't researched it yet. Or the white marker. With color pencil, you can leave the white of the paper for your highlight. That is actually the easiest way to do highlights for color pencil. With painting, you can use the same technique as I showed for markering. You just have to wait for layers of paint to dry before you move on to the next step. With this kind of small beading, do not concern yourself with drawing every single sequin and bead and rhinestone in its precise shape, in the precise number, in this precise layout, because you're going to do that for your beader later anyway. What you want to do is get the basic pattern layout of your beads, the basic texture, color, and sparkle effect that you're going for. So lay out your pattern lightly, color in your base color, and then draw and paint and layer your elements on top using a mixture of markers and color pencils and metallic markers and gouache and whatever you need to get the colors and the effects that you want. And add your highlights on top using all the highlight media that we just went over. Add your sparkle crosses. Make sure that you are referencing the thickness and bulk of the bead and rhinestones in the silhouette of your garment. And lastly, beaded fringe will follow gravity, not the pose. The hips can swing this way, but the beaded fringe will fall following gravity. One last note on media. I like to use marker paper for markers. I like to use any kind of smooth paper, whether it's marker paper or Bristol or just regular printer paper for color pencil. When it comes to watercolor paper, when I am doing a lot of teeny tiny detail work like this, I like to use a smooth hot press watercolor paper to paint with. Cold press papers tend to be rough in texture, which I enjoy when I'm doing rougher textures like all over sweater knits, furs, suedes. If I'm doing a design project and I have a crazy fabric board with lots of textures, I kind of look at what my most important pieces are going to be and what I have the most of. And if I have more tiny, intricate laces and beading and things and just like little bits of fur, I'll go with the hot press paper so that I can get all the details nicely. And then, you know, the fur is less major. If my whole collection is mainly fur and suede, and then I have just a few like pearled things, then I'll just use the cold press paper. But for finely detailed things like this, I like a smooth paper so that the texture doesn't fight all my little details. What else is there to say? Oh yeah, hashtag always be practicing. Hashtag practice not magic. Hashtag if your first one sucks, you're right on track. Okay, I just thought of that one, but I love it because you guys know I love a good ridiculous hashtag that's entirely too long. Practice, check comments and info box for questions, share, subscribe, like, all those ways you show me love. And my favorite thing these days, when people leave comments telling me where they live, I get such a kick out of it. People are watching from Brazil. I have a lot of subscribers from Brazil and Germany and Bulgaria, and just like, I love it. Anyways, I'll see you next time.